Welcome back, everybody. Thirsty Thursday number 56. Tonight we are joined by Mr. Chuck Sheley. I pronounced that correctly?
Yes, you do. Sheely, right. Got it.
Sheley. Okay. Um, when we were getting ready for this episode, I was doing some looking around. One of our previous guests had completed the Georgia Smoke Diver program, and I was like, well, let me learn more about that. So I started typing smoke jumper because that was just what popped into my head and where my fingers were going on the keyboard. And I came to smoke jumpers. I was like, well, this is just as cool. Like, we need to get somebody on here to talk about that. So I sent an email through. I don't even remember where the website took me or where it was, but we got in contact with Chuck. So we are. I am me or myself and the guys that are going to be joining us a little late. Trevor and Mike are going to be joining us a little later. We are super excited to hear about this and hear all about smoke jumping. It's something that we have never, it's never been one of those things that we've had any experience with or exposure to. Um, we do a lot of structural firefighting. I say we do a lot. We would always like to do more, but it is what it is. I can tell you that we are super excited to hear all about the process and maybe some more stories because they're going to be different than our stories. So with that being said, and any further delay, Chuck, would you give us a little intro and a little bit about yourself, and
Yeah.
we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, but what part? I'm remiss. What part of the country are you in?
I'm actually on the eastern shore of Maryland, over
Okay.
by Ocean City. We're on the opposite coast.
Okay. Well, this is interesting because I get a lot of calls from like weather stations, and they want to do what smoke jumping is. And I'm talking to people in the East Coast, and I almost end up saying, as far as smoke jumping goes, we might as well be in China because there's very little knowledge of smoke jumping and wildland firefighter. We're really separate parts of the country. I'm in Chico, California. That's Northern California. I feel like we're the wildfire capital of the world. Uh, I'm also a track and field official, a coach, and that sort of thing. Well, let me give you some background. I had a dual career. I was a physical education teacher, a high school track coach, and a firefighter. So it worked out well for me. I was able to smoke jump and fight fires in the summertime, teach in the rest of the year. So that's how I kind of had a dual career. I jumped for 13 seasons. Started out in Southern Oregon at a place called Cave Junction. Cave Junction was one of the original three smoke jumper bases, started in 1943. I jumped there for about 8 seasons. Then I went up and jumped for Bureau of Land Management in Alaska, Fairbanks. And after that, I went back down here in Chico and I worked for the Mendocino National Forest as a Type 2 crew supervisor. And that meant it was a perfect job for anybody who was a coach. I went out and recruited college students and taught them wildland firefighting. And they were what were called on call crews at that time. In other words, every one of my young people had a pager. They had 2 hours call. They could work anywhere else. They could be Burger King, McDonald's, but they had to answer the call when it came. It's something the Forest Service is not concerned about nowadays, and that's efficiency and cost. This was really a good taxpayer value. In other words, these young people lived in their community and they were 2 hour call and fought fire in the summer. Uh, I started smoke jumping, as I say, in Cave Junction, Oregon, and did that bit there. So, Ben, where do you want me to go from here then?
So how did you get into smoke jumping? What was your introduction to that?
Yeah, it was good. I started on what was called in those days a tanker crew, and now it's called an engine crew on the Lassen National Forest. That's in Northern California. I was sitting in the engine one day having to do the 3 o'clock, 1500 weather report to the dispatcher in Susanville. And then over the radio, clear all traffic. smoke jumper operation in progress. And so I sat there in that tanker and listened to a lookout describe these guys jumping into fire. And I said, I am not going to be sitting in this tanker next summer at this time. So I just went on and sent out a lot of applications and ended up at Cave Junction was one of the smallest. We only had 24 jumpers there. Siskiyou Forest, for people on the East Coast, the Siskiyou is some of the highest timber in the United States. We have 200-foot trees in Southern Oregon and Northern California. And I jumped there, as I say, for 8 seasons before I transferred up to Alaska. Various reasons for that transfer, mainly more money, more pay. Being a teacher, I was able to almost do as well in 3 months as the summers I was able to do teaching for 9 months. It was kind of a survival thing for
Yeah.
a family.
Yeah. So before I'm in my second year full time as a career firefighter paramedic for the town of
Oh,
Ocean City.
super.
Before that, I spent 14 years working in a high school as the athletic trainer.
Ah,
And
wow.
then yeah, and then my wife is a 8th grade special ed teacher, and we actually met through the volunteer fire service. So we know all about.
Oh,
And her whole family has like all of their careers have been through education. So
okay, we relate just like
yeah,
that. There's no
yes,
doubt about it.
yes,
Super, Ben. This is good.
yeah, yeah. So how did you go from that season being to becoming a smoke jumper? You got applications. What was the process like?
At that time, there weren't all the government rules and regulations, and I just found every smoke jumper base in the United States at that time. There and there are currently about 9. Before I get too far into this, smoke jumpers are divided into 2 sectors. There's Forest Service smoke jumpers, and there are Bureau of Land Management smoke jumpers. And the BLM smoke jumpers started in 1959 in Alaska. So you have a
Okay.
large base in Alaska and a large base in Boise. So I just applied and got picked up. As I say, the hiring process was pretty straightforward at that time. And that just set me off. It's just something I had to do. And boy, I moved the family every year at the end of school on Friday afternoon. We loaded the trailer in the U-Haul and headed for Oregon, or years later, we hopped on the plane and headed for Alaska. It's been a great experience.
Oh wow. So what? I'm sorry. What's your family? How many kids?
At that time, I had not that time. I do have 3 children. One, time has moved on. One's a retired deputy sheriff. The other's athletic director at Lane College in Eugene, Oregon. And our daughter's a school psychologist in Sacramento, California.
All right, all right. So you still got the public service through public safety and through education. That's awesome.
You betcha. Yeah.
That's great. Um, so you got like wow that's a big move, and you guys would be in either at either one of the smoke jumping bases for the 3 months that you were off, and then back to California after that.
It was. In Southern Oregon, Cave Junction, at that time it was a logging area. We actually decided we were going to cut trees rather than burn them. And since that time, in California, I'm doing a little soapbox here. The logging industry is shut down. People don't realize that trees are like asparagus; they grow. If you don't remove them from the forest, they're going to go the other way, and that's by burning.
Yeah.
I mentioned, I live in Northern California in Chico. It's interesting. I shot by shooting a track meet. That means I'm a starter. I went to Paradise, California yesterday. It's just up the hill 10 miles. And if people remember, or maybe they don't, we had 4 years ago, we had what was called the campfire. A town of 26,000 people wiped off the map in less than a full day. And yesterday was the first time I'd been back to Paradise High School to shoot a track meet in 4 years. And what struck me as I was on that track used to be shaded by these beautiful tall trees. It was just such an aesthetic setting. And yesterday, it's wide open.
Yeah.
Um, it just struck me being back up there after kind of like, and then the size of the high school. We used to have 1,200 kids at Paradise High School. It's down to four. That fire completely devastated the area here. We had to figure out what we're going to do with 1,000 high school students. And besides the high school students, we got the K through 8 kids.
Yeah.
And where are we going to send them? We had to send them to Chico, all the surrounding towns. Right now in Chico, 4 years later, our homeless problem is berserko. People said it'll be many years before we recover from the effects of the campfire. And then since that time, the Mendocino Forest, where I used to work, which is west of us, burned 1,000,000 acres 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The Dixie Fire, which is east of us, just burned another 1,000,000 acres.
Oh, wow.
And the places where I used to take my wrestling teams up in the mountains, schools are burned, towns are gone. I think it's hard for the people. I know you have hurricanes and stuff on the East Coast, but it's hard to realize the devastation that we experienced from wildfire. When I went up to Paradise a month after the fire, just pick a video of Berlin in 1946,
Mm-hmm.
and you got it. So that's my soapbox, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the videos and all that from that campfire. And then even it seems, so I have a buddy, he works for, or he would go out on the Maryland wildfire team, and absolutely loved it. Like that's like he hustles year round, works nonstop. His name is Todd Dudek. I'm gonna throw him a little plug. Love him to death. Great guy. He's a photographer by day and volunteer fireman. Great guy. And then did that stuff when the season came up. And he just loves going out there. And I remember, talking with him during those couple years, because it seemed like those wildfires, the campfire, and then those couple years after that were just horrendous. And talking with him, it seemed like they were kind of cyclical. Like you'll get a couple bad years, then not so bad, then it gets worse again. So is that kind of the case? Like it burns off, and then you get that regrowth, or is that just whether it's just some anomalies? Do you think?
Well, here's where I'm going to not make the Forest Service happy, but in the last, I would say 30 years, number one, the NEPA, the environmentalists have shut down the logging industry. And I really have a tough time with that. As I say, trees are like asparagus. Every year in California, we increase our growth in the forest by 8 billion board feet. We harvest about 500,000, a fraction of that. So you can see what's happened over the last 30 years since the logging has gone out. And I have to, my grandfather moved to above Paradise. There's a place called Sterling City in Magalia. That was called Diamond Match at that time, a big logging center in Northern California. Well, they moved up there in 1922. So I've come from a logging family. I just have a tough time with people not wanting to harvest our timber because, again, it's going to be harvested by nature, which is by fire, or it can be harvested in a positive way, which means we can create jobs and we can do this. Back when we were harvesting timber, 40% of that money went into our school system in the local towns where we've had high schools closed in towns. We've lost probably over 80 to 100,000 jobs in Northern California in the last 30 years. It's been devastating to us. But
yeah,
I'm wandering on this. I'm getting away from smoke jumping, but there is a connection to our current what the Forest Service called managed fire, and they fight fire a lot different than we did. I just came back from a smoke jumper board meeting in Boise. We held on Monday, and we have a current smoke jumper Forest Service employee on there, and I just said, I'm looking at areas that we used to jump 20 and 30 years ago, and now they're too steep and too rough to jump. Now, you're telling me the hills have gotten steeper? Well, the Forest Service is into a no-risk situation. Okay, you as a structure firefighter are gonna you're gonna risk your ass at times. You're not gonna stand out there in front, and that's what I see right now on wildfire. They're standing out in front, and they do what's called the box theory. So we're gonna box in this fire, and sometimes I think the left side of the box is the Pacific Ocean, the bottom of the box is Mexico, and the top of the box is Canada. I mean, been a million acres here, a million acres there, and now they're turning into brush patches. Okay, what is going to burn so quick? The brush.
Yeah.
So I guess I wouldn't be a popular person with the Forest Service today. My idea is we should attack wildland firefighters just like city firefighters do. In other words, you do not pull up your engine in front of a house and sit there and say, well, shall we get to it today or tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we stop the fire here at this house, or do we go to the end of the block and stop it there?
You know, Ben, I look back when we jumped out of Cave Junction, just 24 of us. We were like family. But we were off the ground in 10 minutes.
Wow.
We hit these fires when they were a quarter acre, when two people could actually do the job. That is bygone, that is past. So, you know, and sooner or later, not sooner or later, but I'd like to get into the history of smoke jumping so your listeners can understand how did this idea start and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's introduce Trevor. So Trevor is the owner of Strike the Box Training, so the company that we do this for. Okay. Trevor, good evening, sir. How are you, buddy? Something's not right, buddy. We can't hear you. Chuck, Trevor he's currently the fire chief in Southern Florida, or I said Central Florida. We worked together in Ocean City before he retired as one of our battalion chiefs and shift commanders, and then moved down there for his retirement gig. Oh. Any luck? Chuck, this is also the most problems we've had with the website and all the time that we've been doing this.
I'm just happy to be here, so we'll roll with it.
Absolutely. Well, while Trevor's figuring his stuff out, let's go ahead and talk about the history of the smoke jumpers.
Yeah, I'd like to. I've been doing Smokejumper Magazine for about 20 plus years right now, and along the way, we've done an exchange program with Russian smoke jumpers. And I had a couple smoke jumpers that went to Russia and came across this beautiful narrative and document about the start of Russian smoke jumping. And they translated it. And back in 2009, I ran in Smokejumper Magazine, Birth of Smoke Jumping 1, 2, 3, and 4 in 4 issues. And, you know, to me, this was We getting Trevor?
You there, buddy?
Can you hear me yet?
Gotcha.
We got you. All right. Strong work.
Okay.
That
Hi,
was
Trevor.
Hey, how you doing, Chuck? Thank you for being on. And that was completely by accident. That had nothing to do with any kind of internet skill whatsoever. But happy to be here.
Okay. Let me pick up with the Russians because
Yes.
when I got this, I thought, wow, this document hasn't been printed before. And I just copied off the first page from 2009. The Russians came up with the idea in 1934. Their first idea was they came up with the idea of dropping retardant. And they're not backwards, they were way ahead of us. But the gentleman who came up with this idea of dropping retardant said, it diffused too much before it reached the ground. And his idea was drop it with a parachute in a large bladder. Russian firefighting is a little different than ours. It's the same type of territory I jumped in Alaska. In other words, zillions of acres of smaller trees, 15, 10, 20-foot trees, nothing like Southern Oregon. And the gentleman's name, and I have to read it, Georgy Alexandrovich Makiv. And he was an interesting gentleman. He was a gutsy guy. He said in writing this, he's a professional forester. He says, I've been through several wars, which I guess everybody who lives in Russia has been through. And he got airsick easily. So I said, number one, this guy had a lot of things working against him. Age, air sickness, but the guy was sharp. And he said, if we're going to put these rubber bladders on the ground with retardant in them, we need to have people on the ground. And what he said, in order to do that, says people must be dropped by parachute. And through his system there, he proposed the idea of smoke jumping. And it wasn't called smoke jumping, it's called parachuting. It was turned down at whatever level it was. And he was persistent enough to take it to the next level. And I don't know how their levels of bureaucracy go, but up the line, there were some smarter people and they gave him the thumbs up. And so they started the Russian smoke jumping program. Their idea was a little different in the United States. Their territory is so vast that the idea, and we did this in Alaska, you drop a couple smoke jumpers and they go to the nearest village or settlement and organize local firefighters. And that was how the program started there. And shoot, by 1936, they were going. Russian smoke jumpers at one time, I think the number is almost up to 6,000. Tremendous number. And I didn't realize how big a territory they have until some of these gentlemen told me. Russia, has 11 time zones. Okay, that almost blows your mind. So I don't know whether somebody in the United States heard about Russian smoke jumpers or whatever, but in 1939, we ran an experimental program in Winthrop, Washington. We hired 4 professional parachutists from the Eagle Parachute Company. They proved that we could safely drop men into mountain territory and put out fires. So smoke jumping essentially in the United States started in 1940 at wasn't Missoula, Montana. Actually, it was Seeley Lake, Montana. And there was a base at Winthrop, Washington. And I've divided smoke jumping into different eras, what I call 40 and 41. People working for the Forest Service off the force were hired. In 43, there were only 7 smoke jumpers left because of the demands of World War II. Smoke jumping was going to fold. It was going to be all over with. And we had about 12,000 conscientious objectors during World War II. Now, conscientious objectors could be objecting for many reasons. The volunteers that volunteered for smoke jumping put their hand up were from the what is called the peace churches, the Mennonites, the Brethren, and the Quakers. And one of those gentlemen wrote to Washington, D.C., said, you know, we are out here doing, what are they? They're supposed to be doing work of national importance. Well, a lot of these were busy work. The CPS guys, instead of national importance, they called it national impotence. So they were happy, and the Forest Service said, yeah, we'll use these guys. They were anxious to prove themselves because World War II was what you call a good war, so to speak. In other words, the nation was completely behind it at that time. These guys received a tremendous amount of criticism for their religious objections, and they really wanted to prove themselves. So over the period of 43, 44, and 45, the Smoke Jumper program was held together by the conscientious objector groups. And in 43 and 43, Cave Junction in McCall, Idaho started. So that was what I call it's called CPS, Civilian Public Service, the 3 years of CPS jumpers. In 45, at the end of World War II, the conscientious objectors were released. They were drafted the same way as people were drafted into the military. They returned, most of them were Midwest farmers. What they couldn't I kind of laugh a little bit what they couldn't understand was the government 8-hour workday. In other words, if you're a Midwest farmer, you got up in the dark and you quit work in the dark. I just heard, I got close to these CPS guys. They said once you put those guys shovel in the ground, you couldn't stop them. They knew what work was. So I really love those guys. 46, no smoke jumpers. They sent all the CPS guys home. Then I have what I call the veterans years, 46, 47, 48, 49. 99% of the smoke jumpers that in 1946 were World War II people. They had no firefighting experience. Most of them were airborne. Okay, they were airborne. They came back. What are we going to do? Something with a parachute. And so I've just written so many stories on these. I thought I wouldn't want to be a trainer of these guys coming back from World War II. Okay, they're 25 years old, 22, 23, 27. Mentally, they're 38. Mm-hmm. How do you enforce rules and regulations on these guys? So that was smoke jumping for, I'd say, up to about 1950. And then we got into what's called the student years. And that was like myself. As I was getting a university degree, I did this in the summer, and then I kept going because I was the teacher. So we had a tremendous turnover of smoke jumpers. People would jump 2 or 3 years, get their education, go off into what we call the world. This continued up till about 1980, 85, and now the current smoke jumpers are professionals, the same as you would have for a structure firefighter and that sort of thing. They half are year-round professionals, and the other half work about 6 months a year. A lot of them actually don't want to work year-round because the beer is cheap in Mexico and the ski slopes are good in Colorado. So we've got that situation. But smoke jumping, what I contrast it with now, we took so much pride in getting out there and keeping a fire small. And we have this continual drumbeat now that fire has been part of our ecology and is supposed to be. But I have to respond. There's a time and a place for wildfire, and there's a time and a place for prescription burning. The time and the place isn't when we in California are in the midst of a 1,200-year drought. We had 40 days of over 100 degrees last summer. Um, I am completely opposed to this controlled burning situation. The amount of smoke and particulate matter we put into the air is tremendous. Sometimes here in Chico, we've been under smoky conditions, which, you can't go out, you shouldn't go out without a mask for 6 and 7 weeks a year.
Wow.
And there's enough science nowadays that shows that particulate matter in wildfire smoke is very dangerous. There's going to be uh, the negative health results of this. We're going to see it 20 years down the line, though.
Yeah.
It's not going to appear right now, but it's going to appear. We're going to have a national health problem in the West in years down the line. I just don't see the strategy. If we want to return wildfire to the landscape, I think there's better ways to do it than what is called managed wildfire during extreme burning conditions.
Yeah. So once I think I don't think I was very direct with the question. So once you were hired and they brought you in as a smoke jumper, what was your training from there? Obviously, how to jump out of a plane with a parachute, but then does it basically go back to wildland firefighting? So like, what was that like once you got hired?
Once I got hired, I went to a base, little bitty town in Southern Oregon. They didn't know anything about. I came out of Chico State, at that time I was a varsity track runner, competed in the 400-meter hurdles and that sort of thing. I found out that the physical training was very strenuous. There's a lot of techniques besides parachute. We went into, at that time, about a 5-week training situation. And it was everything from parachute manipulation, exit of an airplane, Southern Oregon, tree climbing. I am not a good tree climber. I hated to climb trees. A 200-foot tree scared the heck out of me. How do you get out of a 200-foot tree? It's a rappelling process. So within our canvas smoke jumper outfits, we had what were called D-rings sewn into it, and that's what we use for a rappelling device. We carried 150 foot of it's actually glider tow rope. It's called letdown rope. So if we hung up, we knew how to get out of that tree. We spent most of our time on learning how to use the parachute, learning how to get out of trees and that sort of thing. Not a lot of time on wildland firefighting because most of us had a pretty good idea how to do that. Tree falling. Falling a piece of timber is one of the most dangerous things in the world. People have no idea, the longevity of a logger in Northern California, Southern Oregon, might have been age 45 before, you make that one mistake that gets you. Mm-hmm. So we spent time on tree falling. When you jump a fire, most of the fires we jumped were lightning strikes. The deal in smoke jumping is we hit areas where you couldn't drive to or you couldn't walk to for a day or two. If you could drive to it with an engine, there's no sense having people jump out of an airplane. We were back at times 20 and 30 miles from the nearest trail or the nearest road. So we had a lightning strike hits a tree, the fire's up in the tree, or a snag, which is a dead tree. You've got to fall that thing, and it's tricky. I mean, many people have been killed by falling snags, the dead trees. You have to be skilled to do that. I'm so far back, we didn't use chainsaws at that time. We had what called a misery rip. The misery rip was a 6-foot crosscut saw. So that was our training. And the physical end of it was every day we trained at least an hour on what we call PT, physical training. The amount of it attracted a lot of athletes. As I got later on, I went from a jumper to a squad leader to a foreman position. And at one time I had one of the top hurdlers in the United States. I had an All-American cross-country runner from Colorado. I had da-da-da-da-da-da. So it was interesting from that standpoint. I think the best thing about smoke jumping is the people we met. Just super individuals.
Yeah. So then you said a lot of times when you go up to like Alaska, those kind of places where you would jump into a place and then hike to the village and recruit them. A lot of it was over a year ago. We had on the show a lady with the Alaska State Fire Marshal's office who went out to those very remote villages and taught them their basic firefighting, because like they didn't have anything. Like their fire truck would be like a UTV with a trailer and a pump on it, and it was basically good luck. So how was that when you went up to Alaska and working with those folks?
It was interesting. When I went to Alaska, I went from a base of 24 to a base of 80 in Alaska. Alaska is so big. Sometimes we'd be 200 or 300 miles from the nearest road. That meant that in Southern Oregon, what we call pack outs. After a fire, you have to put on 110 pounds worth of gear and pack all that crap to the nearest road until somebody picks you up. In Alaska, there's no way. You wait for a helicopter to pick you up, or you go to a lake and a float plane will pick you up. But at my time, I didn't work much with native crews. We jumped a lot of fires. And at this time, the situation was developing. A lot of these fires were started by the natives because they knew that we were going to go to the nearest village and hire firefighters. I remember one fire I jumped and coming down, and you could hear, when you're on a parachute, everything, the world is so silent. And I was coming down, and I could hear voices. And I got to the ground, and there were these Native Alaskan women. And they said they were just picking berries. And I said, well, how far is the village away? And one of the ladies said, 6 miles. I said, would you go back to the village? I'd like to hire 15 of your village people. Okay. She went around the corner, and about 20 minutes later, yeah, right. You guys got the picture. It's like they were sitting 300 yards down the trail waiting for the call. So after that, it developed into a policy where we didn't hire anybody from the village in that area. We had to bring them in from another area.
Oh, wow.
But that was fine. We could play the game.
Yeah. Trevor, you're muted, buddy.
Oh,
boom.
Trevor.
Better?
There we go.
Okay. I figured it. I had this figured out by now, but Chuck, I find what you all have done absolutely fascinating, and I have a great deal of respect for it. And unlike a structural firefighter, and Ben can appreciate these analogies, that if we say, okay, most of our structures in our downtown area are going to be 2.5 story wood frame structures, so forth and so on. We have a little bit of pre-planning, but for you in the wildland world, you probably really, other than some topographical intelligence or something else, you probably don't have nearly the amount of pre-planning information that we do in the structural world. And just for full disclosure and transparency, and Ben, again, you'll appreciate this analogy. My largest wildland experience is a 20-foot by 40-foot patch of trees behind the 94th Street Mall. And I pumped a tanker at a 5-acre cornfield fire, which, Chuck, you probably you probably sleep through that. That wouldn't even be something that would be of interest. But we used to have a lot of guys from the East Coast, which, we're relatively flat topography until you get in the western part of the states. But, as Ben had said, we had talked to people, from Alaska. We had the opportunity to teach out there and just look at the expanse. But, looking at some of the just dynamics, and you had touched on some of these before, but some of our folks that used to go out and would prepare for the Western wildland fires, they do their box test and they get on the list, so to speak. And one of the things I found the most interesting, and again, you touched on this a little bit, was there were several, and depending on the area of the country, there were several Native American tribes that were very much like their own fire company, if you will. And it was very interesting to them because they were used to the dynamic that, on the East Coast, that if you had a fire or you were part of a department, you went as one group. But there seemed to be quite a bit of segregation, or like you had said, there's the political and legal foundations of everything that kind of bears into that. So what's your experience with in the CONUS in the continental United States, as far as when the East Coast people would come out to try to integrate? What's some advice you can give to them? Because still today we have people who want to go out and fight the big Western wildland fires, but really don't understand the complete dynamic of everything that's going on, because it's very foreign to us.
Trevor, I would think, and it's really interesting. Early on, and I'm a nut on Smokejumper history. I just write. A lot of the 40s and 50s smoke jumpers came from the East Coast, and you say, well, why in the world did they come from the East Coast? They saw this movie called Red Skies of Montana with Richard Widmark in 1949, and bingo, they're heading west. They're getting lookouts. But what amazing people we've got along the line in our history that have come from the East Coast. Now, currently, I get a lot of people, not a lot, I get a good number of people that come over our website and say, how can I become a smoke jumper? And a lot are back in the East Coast. And I say, you've got to have wildland firefighting experience. And the fact that you've been military or structure fire is not going to really help you in the current system. So you've actually got to come out here and get on a hand crew. And after a hand crew, you've got to get onto what's called a hotshot crew. And I would say the hotshot crew they're type 1. Smoke jumpers are called type 1. The hotshot crews are the bread and butter of wildland firefighting. I mean, boy, if you ever want to put your nose in the dirt and do something tough, take a job as a hotshot. So right now, you have to have 3 or 4 seasons at least of wildland firefighting experience before you even apply to smoke jumping. So, Trevor, maybe I'm dancing around your question, but that's just the way. That's what I advise young people who get a hold of me over our website and say, how can I become a smoke jumper? I'm going to say, well, it's not going to happen in 1 year. And that's what I think is the difference. You're going to have to spend 4 or 5 seasons of your life, and now the seasons are 6 and 8 months long. It's going to be a tough haul between, if you're a college or university person and you want to become a wildland firefighter, you're going to have to flip a coin and make a decision there.
No, and Chuck, I get that completely, and I appreciate your candor with that. And just to kind of be on an equal playing field, you had mentioned before about like the respirators that the wildland folks are using, and that's a big conversation right now in the NFPA. And again, full disclosure, I'm part of that technical committee for respiratory protection. I sit on a board where I have a voice in wildland firefighting, and I've never done it. So wow. I tried to make sure I meter my voice and understand my capabilities and limitations. But I was talking to a chief from Los Angeles County, and obviously they have the wildland urban interface, just like we do here in Florida. In Maryland, again, the wildland urban interface is behind the 94th Street Mall. No offense, Ben, but we know where that is. I mean, if a homeless encampment lights off a pine tree behind the 94th Street Mall, that's our brush fire for us. So with that being said, they talked about the difference between people using the PAPRs, the powered air purifying respirators versus the N95s. And if you're packing out and trying to go into a warm zone, and you're being required because somebody like me who has this much experience in wildland is saying, oh yes, absolutely, for respiratory protection we should do this. But to me, the wisdom is in the trenches. how do you feel that in the big picture of I'll say the respiratory protection or the industry standard environment, um, how good or bad do you feel that we are as far as addressing the needs of these wildland firefighters? Because again, the folks from the West Coast, you all see this much more than we do. East Coast, in a lot of respects, we do see it, but more on a urban wildland interface, not so much like a complete, you're being dropped in 50 miles inside of a zone where, the closest village that has 3 people is, 60 miles away from you. So, show me that balance a little bit, Chuck, because I'd like to be able to take some of that wisdom back to the groups that we work with.
Wow, Trevor, I don't know as I'm going to have much wisdom. You're way ahead of me on respirators and protection. I don't know if our wildland firefighters are using protective devices. I mean, I haven't heard much talk about that, and I'm in constant communication with hotshot crews and stuff.
Okay, well, Chuck, and just pardon the interruption, but I just went recently to we had a respiratory protection workshop for 3 or 4 days, and part of that was respiratory protection. And again, the folks that have spent the time in the trenches said, "Hey, look, thank you so much for looking out for our people and making sure we have the equipment, but don't tell us how to use the equipment that we know how to use it, but you're dictating how to use it." And again, my experience in that tree patch behind the 94th Street Mall is not anywhere useful to that wildland firefighter who's being dropped in 60 miles behind a tree line. So that's where I'm trying to kind of get some perspective on this, is to see what are the needs versus what's being pushed in your industry, if there's really even any conflict with that right now in your mind.
I don't, talking to smoke jumpers, I don't know anybody that does anything but put that bandana up over their nose. So, I mean, that's a sad answer, Trevor, but I am completely remiss and unaware of these devices being worn by wildland firefighters. And I know health-wise, this is probably something we need to be doing, and it's coming. But I'm way behind. I just do not hear of that and I get constant feedback from the field. So I'm going to have to apologize for not being a good source.
No, and Chuck, please, and I mean this, obviously kiddingly and flippantly when I say this, but I heard a term from one of my friends who serves in, and Ben, you're from the Pennsylvania area originally, but one of my friends who serves up in Amish country during the COVID pandemic was very quick to tell me is, you know what, the Amish community really wasn't affected that much by COVID. I was like, really? I'm surprised by that, because of the communal living, everything else. I said, why is that? He goes, they didn't have television. So, I mean, I think a lot of this has to do with, we go with what's tried and true. And, but I was just very curious about that. But Chuck, thank you very much for your candor in that. But I think as long as we can provide the protective equipment without over legislating it, especially when you have people who, like myself, I'll be the first one to tell you, I am the last one who needs to tell a wildland firefighter how they should do their job. So I want to protect them. I want to get the wisdom from the trenches, but at the same time, I have no appetite whatsoever for saying thou shalt do this without hearing how they work and what they do and how they perform their duties, and say, what can we do for you versus here's what we're going to do for you. So that's just kind of my mindset. So anyway, there ends the sermon.
I think that's good. There would be no way that I would want to step into the world of structure firefighter and say anything other than to speak my mouth. So maybe protective devices will be coming. My point of emphasis right now is let's put out these fires before they get big enough to where we need all these protective devices. Trevor, I don't know whether you were on my talking to Ben earlier, but we go through sometimes weeks of very unhealthy air here in Northern California just because of the millions of acres we're burning. So I think we as citizens walking in downtown Chico need to wear that 95 mask, same as the firefighters.
Chuck, here's a question for you. What is the new and like what's the big term? What's the big thing right now for smoke jumpers? So for us with structural firefighting, with or like over on the West Coast, and I'm sure, and I know that they're seeing it in California as well and throughout the country. It's the lithium battery issue with the electric vehicles and micromobility devices and all that kind of stuff. What's the big thing right now that's a big issue for smoke jumpers?
The big issue now, and for smoke jumpers and federal wildland firefighters, is pay. I mean, I do my best because so many smoke jumpers have actually gone into the professions that you guys. They become structure firefighters. You know, they jump a couple of years, and if they're smart, they'll work for LA County or something like that and make 3 times the money. They'll not be sent away for a couple months at a time from their home and their family. So we've been pushing with the Smoke Jumper Association, been supporting the grassroots firefighters to up the pay. It was like $15 an hour. Okay. And I was, I had a GAO group call me, all these big wigs, GAO is supposed to do investigation. And I said, I train close to 4,000 young people as wildland firefighters. So I've got a pretty good idea of what these kids can do. I say you could go downtown at McDonald's and Subway and make $16 an hour. Why in the world? Fighting wildland firefighter is probably the next thing to combat, except there's nobody shooting at you. In other words, it is a tough job. And so the wildland firefighters, what they need now is pay. They're looking for the same thing as the city and county units that come up from Southern California, and that's portal to portal. It's going to be a long time catching up. The smoke jumpers are probably short 40 to 50 in the Forest Service and the BOM of meeting their hiring quotas. In other words, who wants to do this job anymore? It used to be pretty attractive. It's not that attractive now. After we had the smoke jumper killed in New Mexico 2 years ago, they were doing an investigation, and they said, and I was talking to the base manager in Alaska, and he said, actually, about 20% of the smoke jumpers are homeless. I said, well, what do you mean by that? No, they can't afford to live in Boise. They can't afford to live in these towns. So what are they doing? They're living in their pickup in the parking lot. And I say, this is not how you're going to create a professional fire organization.
Right.
It's a sad deal.
Wow. I love being able to say that I'm a firefighter, that I'm a part of the fire service. I have loved that honor since I started, and now that I get to do that as my career, it's fantastic. And I would imagine, and I would certainly hope that being able to say that you're a smoke jumper, holy cow, talk about the feather in your cap. I mean, I don't know anybody that does that other than meeting you now virtually, that does that. And it's just it's something it's almost so big that I can't comprehend it. And then to find out that they they don't make a livable wage is absolutely embarrassing. We need to do better, not just as, a population, but as a fire service. We all fight for each other to have better pay and to, better working conditions, all that kind of stuff. That is I'm floored by that. That's truly sad.
I am too, Ben. I mean, no, I'm sorry. Ben, I am too. That's the first time I'm hearing that. And that's an atrocity, because I almost look at that like being a wandering, and of course, I don't have the the Midwest or West Coast experience, but it's almost like that ranch hand who goes from ranch to ranch or fire to fire, just trying to get picked up somewhere, and is living by the most frugal means possible. And like Chuck's saying, that might be in the cab of their pickup truck. And I had no idea that was even a something that we were dealing with in the American Fire Service, let alone these people. And I got to tell you, Chuck, again, I'm not a wildland guy. I think wildland firefighting, that's way too much like work. I mean that is, and I'll just be very visceral. I mean, it is ass breaking, back breaking, thankless, just struggling work for hours and hours and hours on end. So, to me, to have that kind of a deficit is really, it's almost criminal. What do you think, Ben?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to kick this back on the Forest Service because I've got a hard on for the Forest Service just because of the way they treat their employees. And gentlemen, this has been a system that's been developing over years. When I jumped, there was no overtime. Everything was straight time. And we did an interesting article. I had a guy I jumped with in Alaska who is a fire captain in Southern California. He's retired now. He lived in Carpinteria. But he went from smoke jumping to, I think, LA County or something like that. He did a super article, and I could send it to you, from Smokejumper Magazine. He interviewed in Southern California 23 ex-smoke jumpers, and that went to LA County, Santa Barbara County, stuff like that. Well, the reasons they went, number one, pay, but one of the main reasons was being able to have a family and being able to live in a house and not be like a smoke jumper where you're on the road 4 or 5 months a year. The Boise smoke jumpers, you dial in at Boise and there's no smoke jumpers there. They're stationed in, you'd love to be stationed in Winnemucca, Nevada, Elko, all these water holes out in the middle of the desert. And then, like one of the Redmond smoke jumpers said, when we get sent from Redmond in Oregon to Redding in California, we get down there and we're away from our families and stuff, and then we get paid 8 hours a day on standby. Holy Toledo. We really need to make some changes. When I met with the meeting I had on Monday, I talked to one of the current smoke jumpers, and I said, they make about $60,000 a year. For the type of work you do, and you are right about them being the top of the scale. They're probably some of the most highly trained wildland firefighters in the United States. In other words, you don't get there without putting in your dues. And then if you look at the smoke jumpers now, half of them are actually jumping fires, but the other half are out on what are called single resource. So they're going out as tanker bosses. They're going out as cat bosses. They're going out as air support, something like that, in order to get their qual cards signed. There's going to be things that are just going to have to change to make this something where we could sustain these. And I'm going to touch on one more point. We used to have what's called local hire. And the Forest Service during fire season says we can't get firefighters. And during my career, my job for the Mendocino, I went around to 2 universities and the local high schools, and I talked to the seniors. If I couldn't get 10 seniors out of every high school in Northern California to join into a fire crew in the summer, I would be a failure. Well, now they don't do that anymore. They have what's called a centralized hiring system in Albuquerque. So the young man or young lady in Alturas, California, applies to Albuquerque. They give he or she a job in Colorado. Well, how, when you're 18 years of age, can you move to Colorado and at pennies, at $15 an hour, and pay the rent because there's no housing available anymore? And I'm saying we need to get rid of this bureaucracy crap and give our. I'm a teacher and a coach, so I just love young people. I want young people to get a job with my my on-call crews, I felt the best thing I could do is give an 18-year-old the first job they had in their life to start their resume. I thought that everybody in their life, if you want to appreciate food and water, ought to fight one season of wildfire. You'll have a different perspective when you come home. Right now, the Forest Service with this centralized hiring is just killing our work pool. Well, so much about bureaucracy. Okay.
Yeah, and it's also you see, and Trevor understands this as well, and I do too, not to the same extent, but you see the job that you had and the love and all the fun stuff and all the great things that you did throughout your career, and now you see the organizations and the bureaucracy just flushing it down the tube, and it hurts. It's not. It's a shame at what they're doing, what's happening to it, and that's part of it. Like you see what great it used to be, and the pride and all that kind of stuff that came with it, and now you see what it is, and it's heartbreaking. So I can't imagine the your true feelings, and not that you haven't shared some of those with us, but I don't imagine that we've gotten the entire Chuck feeling on all of this.
It is, when I talked to a current smoke jumper on Monday, the first thing I found out is there are no risk. How can you how can you do a job with no risk? Okay, as I said, you guys don't stand out in front of the building and flip a coin and say, are we going to go in today or are we going to wait a couple of days? And I'm talking to this young man. He said, we are so risk adverse with the Forest Service now that jumper airplanes on the way to the fire have been canceled by people who have they have no idea what smoke jumpers can do. In other words, I say, let the plane get over the fire. Let the people that know what they're doing determine whether we're going to jump that fire or not. Don't let some dispatcher sitting in a chair with four wheels make the decision when he or she, the probably closest they've ever got to a fire is when they struck a match or something like that. They got no friggin' clue. But this is what we're doing nowadays, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Chuck, I could not agree with you more. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And again, I'll go back to that term I used before. The wisdom is in the trenches, and the people in administration should be there to provide resources and allocate resources. But you're going to have a guy like me because I've got an extra bugle or two on my collar. And again, I was very transparent to say, my capabilities and limitations of wildland firefighting, but you're going to have a guy like me saying yes or no when the people who do this day in and day out, and, they call a 1,000-acre wildland fire Tuesday, where I would be freaked out over that. So I really think, as you're saying, there needs to be a better communication between the command and the operations, if you will, of these incidents to have a better deployment model. I mean, it's that simple, because it's really easy to make a decision in the EOC when you have limited information and err on the side of caution, because you don't want the news cycle to be against you at 11 o'clock. But nevertheless, there's people who they can tell you, yes, this is within our capabilities, or hey, look, this is not a good idea. Let's wait till this weather system goes, or let's wait till Wednesday, Thursday, whatever the case is, to make a better operational or logistical or strategic or tactical decision. And Chuck, I feel for you, because the same thing is happening in the structural world as well. We just put a different name over it. That's it.
After this is over with, I'm going to email Ben. I want to get both of your mailing addresses, because I want to put you on the Smokejumper Magazine mailing list. It would just be educational and give you an idea of what's going on out here. in Northern California, as I say, we're in Chico, and we're just right on the campfire burned within 3 miles of the edge of Chico. It's going to get worse as the warming situation and climate change goes. Next will be Southern Oregon, then we'll be over in Idaho. I will long be gone by that time, but 30 or 40 years from now, this whole thing is going to snowball on us. And I just am frustrated with the current attitude that even though wildfire is a part of the ecology, you don't do it under these conditions. I mean, I am so tired of hearing about how the Native Americans did it way back when. And what I'm saying is there weren't 303 million people in the country at that time. There wasn't the urban interface at that time. And I think the Native Americans were not any different than the rest of us. In other words, what they did with wildfire was to benefit them, to make their hunting better, to make their village protection better, whatever it was. But once they lit a fire, they didn't care where it ended. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to say, I really think this country was sculpted in the 8th and 9th and 10th centuries by lightning, but nobody mentions that. And I'm going to use an example. Northern California here. On an afternoon, a typical lightning storm in Northern California will have 12,000 strikes. We will probably get 800 fires out of that. We will probably get 70 to 80, which really need attention. But this happens day after day after day. So, gentlemen, if you go back into 1012 and 1013 and 1014 and whatever century, that's how our country, at that time, wildfire kept the forest clear. Our fuel load in these forests is overwhelming now. Since we stopped the logging industry in 1980, as I said earlier, in California, 8 billion board feet of new timber every year. And then the next year, 8 billion more. Well, right now in our forests, instead of the trees being like this, they're like this. It's like a jungle. And if we don't clear it, and logging could be a part of it. And I know the environmentalists hate logging. We want to save every tree. And I've always said to those people, good, let's go to your house. Let's take every wood product in your house and throw it in the front yard and burn it. What will you have left? You'll be living in a nylon tent. As I was writing, I wrote a book called Smokejumpers in the CIA, because that was an interesting part of smoke jumping. And I was going to Vietnam and Laos to do research on that. And I see what is happening to the hardwoods and the timber in Southeast Asia. So we don't harvest our timber here, but we have no qualms about cutting down other people's trees. So, wow, I got really off, didn't I?
It's all good. That's the great thing about this. Go ahead, Shower.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Chuck, not really, because I've always felt. I tell you what, you and I could have some great conversations.
Yes,
I've always felt that you should be a good steward of the environment and take care of Mother Nature. But a lot of things are cyclical, but there's a balance. And what you just said, and I've heard this not just from you, but from some other people out west. And I don't have an appreciation of this because we just don't have the same topography. But like you said, when there's a certain amount of forestation, deforestation that takes place, separates the fire load from each other, then there's a balance there. If it's too thin, okay, we're overcutting, we're overdoing, we're taking resources. But when you have things that used to be like this and now they're like this, I mean, that's simple mathematics. And I'm not a math guy, but I can even figure that out. So,
well, gentlemen, have you guys heard of the spotted owl?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. That was the first NEPA lawsuit. The environmentalists sued because we got to save the spotted owl. So that shut down logging in Oregon, and actually the West Coast. So since that time, again, our trees are growing like asparagus. We put 100,000 people out of jobs. We closed schools, communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The cartels have moved in with the marijuana industry. Northern California is like the Golden Triangle in Laos, except it's in California. Things have gone to pot. It's we're just not doing things right. And the key to forest is right now we need to manage forests. We don't manage them anymore. If you look at the Forest Service, the professional foresters are about 1/3 of what we had 20 and 30 years ago when we really had good forest management. We took care of rivers, we took care of streams, we took care of roads, drainages. Right now, we're spending $5 billion with a B a year on wildfire, and like they said in that Tom Cruise movie, just follow the money. In other words, this is a good way to fight fire. Let's box it in because we could be here for 21 days. Da 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 da. What is the reason to put this fire out?
Mm-hmm.
You know, big, and look at the air tanker industry. We keep getting big air tankers. 747s, for crying out loud. I've always advocated one 747. I could have 20 of these Fireboss aircrafts. They're a little single engine aircraft. They can scoop off of lakes and waters. They drop 800 gallons. They can reload in 48 seconds. If I would spread these all over, 20 of them around Northern California, much better than one 747 flying out of Sacramento, making one drop and you never see them again. I'd love to have these little fire bosses rotating. I'd like to be a jumper on the ground with a fire boss and communicating and say, drop your next load here. Drop your next load here. That pilot goes over to the lake 10 miles away. He's back in 10 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. We're not using that. The air tanker industry is big bucks, gentlemen. And,
Mm-hmm.
To me, when I see a 747 flying over, it's what they call the CNN drop. They're dropping from 3,000 feet. For crying out loud. All this big, beautiful pink comes down, and everybody sits at home and says, oh, look at what we're doing to this fire. Well, we're not doing shit to this fire. We just blew $150,000. We have got our head so far, I call it the cranial anal disease, and that's head up your ass disease. It's a sad. Whoops.
You're good.
Thank you.
We every week we submit a waiver to the FAA or FCC, okay. So it's okay. We had a show a long time ago where we started doing that. We had the guy came on and we knew it was going to be trouble, so we started submitting them.
Well, it's I like to tell it like it is. I get so discouraged going back to the days when we took so much pride. We were like you guys. The siren goes off. You guys want to be there instantly. We wanted to do the same thing.
Yeah.
We had a lot of pride in fighting most of our fires. We called them two-manners, just two jumpers. And that's talk about spreading your manpower out. We could, if we get there in New Mexico one season, we had 420 fire jumps. What we did, we're in a DC3 and we followed the lightning storms. We got up in the afternoon. The Gila Forest in New Mexico is 8,000 to 10,000 feet. It's the start of the Continental Divide. We followed the lightning storms. Boom, a smoke. We jumped it. Well, shoot. The average fire that summer is 1/10 of an acre because we caught the fire in the same tree that was struck by lightning. And I told that to a current jumper. I said, why don't you guys load up the aircraft and follow the storm? Oh, he said, what a wonderful idea. Like, geez, I just invented bread or something. I mean, holy moly.
Everything old is new.
Yeah, gosh sakes. It's like I feel like we're in the lost world. What do you do? We come with King Arthur or somebody? This is crazy.
Yeah. Well, so we're at about an hour and 15 minutes.
Oops.
So we are definitely open to a round two in the future, if you're interested, Chuck, if you'd like to come back on,
Oh,
because I'm sure there's plenty more to talk about. I know I have more questions about smoke jumping, and I'd love to get you back on and chat some more. But with that being said, I think let's go ahead and wrap it up for tonight, and then, like I said, we'll be in contact to get you back on, because I think there's still more great stuff to talk about. I want to hear about some of the fires that you've been on and some of the stuff that you've done operationally, and more about what you're doing as the editor of Smokejumper Magazine. So, with that being said, Trevor, I'm gonna kick it down to you for your closing thoughts.
All right, brother Ben, I appreciate that very much. Chuck, thank you so much for being on tonight. I think I've learned more about wildland firefighting in the last hour and 15 minutes than I have in 36 years of a fire service career. And I mean that sincerely. I think it's great to hear the perspective from people who've done this and who are doing it. And just like in our industry in the structural world, just to see the impediments, the politics, all the stuff that weigh into keeping us from doing our job, when a lot of it just seems to be common sense. And unfortunately, some of those things get regulated out of our industry. But I'm hoping the pendulum kind of swings back in the direction that it needs to. And, very interesting stuff. And I agree with you, Ben, if we can get, Chuck and some of the smoke jumpers back on, because I think this is a very unsung part of our fire service history in the United States. And there's just so much to it that we don't even realize. And especially where more and more, I'm in South Florida now, and we do have a lot of wildland urban interface, which is completely different than, hundreds of thousands of acres in the wildland of Oregon, Washington, California, Alaska. But, we're being kind of pushed in that direction. But a lot of us who have the bigger voice in the fire service, if you will, are pushing from the structural side, because that's our frame of reference. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I think we need to have these conversations. And again, I'll use the term over and over again. The wisdom is in the trenches. The people who've done the job have a lot to say. Sometimes their voices aren't heard, but I really think that there's a lot of great information that we have out here. And, again, we can put all the BS aside, and, what can we do to make this industry better for all of us? And I'm very glad, I'll just say this as kind of a side closing note. Up until somewhat recent years, the wildland firefighting community was never considered part of the firefighting community. And what I mean by that is, I was just at the National Fire Academy, a couple of weeks ago. And, if a wildland firefighter was injured, killed in line of duty, that's those guys, not us guys. It's all of us. And, I'm sorry, yes, we have our slings and arrows of structural firefighting and what we deal with, but guess what? My fat happy ass has not been on the edge of a slope and had a fire burning up the side of a mountain where I've had to take shelter and be a baked potato underneath a thermal blanket. That is not within my wheelhouse, and I can't even imagine that. So, I'm just glad that we're kind of holistically looking at all of our brothers and sisters in the fire service, whether it's aircraft, wildland, structural, hazmat. I'm glad we're kind of all coming underneath the same umbrella now and kind of getting out of our silos. But Chuck, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you giving your perspective, and I look forward to more of that, because I think it's very important for the American Fire Service. And Ben, thank you for taking the initiative tonight. My son, actually right now, I'm shaking like a dog crapping razor blades. My son's at his first prom right now, so hoping it's going well. That's why I was a little bit late coming on. I had to drop him off, but I wish you guys the best luck, and thank you thank you both for what you do.
Chuck, you want to give us some final thoughts?
Yeah, gentlemen, I've enjoyed this. An hour 15, I had no idea we went that fast. Right. What I'm going to do, Ben, I'm going to communicate directly with you. I want to add both of you guys to the magazine, because I think that will be educational.
Perfect.
And I want to do this in the future because this has been a real pleasure talking to you guys.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. I'm also going to get your mailing address. We're going to send you some Strike the Box stuff that we have, just as a little thanks for coming on and joining us. And like I said, we'll continue that communication back and forth to set a date to get you back on, because like I said, there's more that we want to hear about smoke jumping, and like I said, I want to hear some of the stuff that you've done. You know, it's certainly different now than what it was.
Yes.
You know, structural firefighting is different now than when I started. So I want to hear, you know, like what let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's hear about Chuck back in the day.
You know, this is good. I didn't talk much about jumping fires and about experiences. I got into what is concerning me now, and that's the political situation. So I'll do a better job next time, guys.
No. It was a great job tonight, because I think like we talked about, you know, the issues that the current wildland firefighters and smoke jumpers are facing, like that's stuff that you know, I like to consider myself pretty well educated on the current needs and issues in the fire service, but would have never known. So no, I think the conversation tonight was fantastic, and I'm super excited. I typically don't go back and listen to our shows, but I'm going to go back and listen to this one, just because I know there's always stuff that I missed.
Okay.
So just some closing thoughts here and some stuff that we have coming up. So in 2 weeks, on May 11th, we have Eric. Trevor, what's Eric's last name? How do you pronounce that, from the National Fire Academy?
It's Eric Gablix. He's from the National Fire Academy. He's the superintendent, and basically the premise is that the National Fire Academy is exactly what it is. It's our national fire training school, the Emergency Management Institute, and it's so many different things wrapped up in one. But we want to make sure that we promote that, because it's a very underutilized resource, and most of the classes are free.
Awesome. So he's coming on in 2 weeks on May 11th. So that's a great show. We've already planned May 25th, and I apologize, I forget who we've got there. This show is going to go live tomorrow as a podcast on all of the podcast platforms. I'll continue to follow the Facebook and social media stuff for Strike the Box. If you're interested in more smoke jumping stuff, smokejumpers.com, it's all one word, smokejumpers.com, is the National Smoke Jumpers Association. And you can also go there and see the Smokejumper Magazine that Chuck was talking about. Kind of looking through there, they've got some great stuff, some more history, the articles that Chuck was talking about that he's written about the history, and then all kinds of current events and stuff that they have are there. A couple last things before we close out. I want to share this. I'm going to throw this guy up here. I don't know if anybody knows this kid, but this is Trevor's son, Kai, at prom, or going to prom. Says, you need to be careful, have fun, have a great night. So Kai, we hope you have a great time, buddy. Some other real quick shout outs. Mike Wood, one of our regular co-hosts, could not join us tonight. His daughter is being inducted to the National Honor Society at school. So that's awesome stuff. Congrats. And anybody that is out at FDIC, a lot of our previous guests have been instructors there. So we hope you guys are having a great time and having a safe time out at FDIC. Get some education. More importantly, what you do with that education when you go back to your departments is huge. So make sure that you share that. That's one of the things that I've always learned was a big part of FDIC, was sharing that information when you get back to your departments. So with that being said, cheers, gentlemen. Thank you for a great night. Chuck, thank you, sir. It was a great show.
Great, guys. You betcha. Thank you.
And we'll see you guys soon.
I got it.